On the morning of August 31st, 2003, the lifeless body of 22-year-old Katie Sepich was found near a remote landfill in the desert of Las Cruces, New Mexico. Last seen by friends leaving a local house party after a night of bar hopping, it would take nearly 4 years to identify her killer. Described by her mom as an outspoken, vivacious, intelligent 22-year-old woman, she grew up in Carlsbad, New Mexico. She was the oldest of 3 siblings. Katie graduated with a business degree from New Mexico State University and was set to start grad school to get her MBA in the fall. She worked as a waitress at a local Mexican restaurant. Katie was a very outgoing person. While studying at the university, she met a guy named Joe Bischoff. The friendly relationship between them quickly turned into something more romantic. Katie told her mother, Jayann, that she was happy with Joe. She wanted to build a future together with him. And Katie realized her dream could come true a few months later when Joe gave her a diamond ring. When Katie and Joe graduated from university in the summer of 2003, they encountered difficulties in their relationship. Katie decided to continue her studies at the university, and Joe returned to his parents in Gallup, New Mexico, a small city about 350 miles from Las Cruces. Katie was really upset that Joe had to leave. The long-distance relationship was unbearable, but they still managed to meet sometimes. On Labor Day weekend in 2003, Joe came to Las Cruces and Katie was over the moon. However, the weekend together turned into a tragedy. It was Saturday, August 30th, 2003. Katie had fun with Joe and their friends, hopping from one bar to another before getting to a local house party, after which Katie disappeared. The next day, Katie's mom, Jayann, answered a phone call that changed her life forever. This is how Jayann later described the morning she found out her daughter had disappeared. On August 31st, 2003, my family woke up to the promise of a beautiful day. We had a house bursting with friends and family, and we were preparing to celebrate Labor Day weekend with a cookout. Then, at 2:15 that afternoon, the phone rang and our lives were shattered with just 6 words. "Have you talked to Katie today?" Katie was my incredible, outspoken, vivacious, intelligent daughter. Katie, our firstborn who filled every room with light and laughter. Her roommate was calling, hoping we knew where she was. She had called all of her friends, even the local hospitals, and there was no sign of Katie. Veronica, Katie's roommate, told Jayann that Katie had left the party alone that night. As for Veronica and Joe, they fell asleep in the house where the party was taking place. They thought that Katie had gone home, but in the morning, it turned out that she was nowhere to be found. Her family contacted the police and reported the disappearance. At about the same time, someone discovered a half-naked female body next to a desert landfill. There were no documents near the body, but seeing the external signs, the police officers who arrived at the scene concluded that it had been lying there for no more than a day. They also immediately realized that the victim's death wasn't a result of an accident. The victim appeared to be about 20 to 25 years old. She was naked from the waist down, which made the motive for this crime obvious. There were self-defense wounds on her arms. She was fighting for her life, scratching the one who attacked her. There were particles of the criminal's skin under her fingernails. Therefore, the police had the DNA sample of the person who took her life. There were signs of strangulation on her neck, and at first glance it seemed the most likely cause of her death. The investigators saw no signs of a struggle near the body, which allowed them to conclude that this young woman died somewhere else. Apparently, the perpetrator moved her body to the remote desert landfill, hoping it would take people a long time to find her. And there was something else shocking found on the victim's body: burn marks on her arms and back. It indicated that the perpetrator was trying to dispose of the body or destroy evidence, and therefore set the victim on fire. The police quickly connected the dots between the disappearance of Katie and the body of a young woman they found. Katie's father came to the morgue to identify the body, and this is what Jayann, Katie's mother, said about it. A few agonizing hours later, our worst fears were realized. There are no words to describe the agony, no way to express the pain. We fell into a deep black pit with no way out. There was no tomorrow. All joy was gone. Katie's father had to go to the morgue to identify his beloved daughter. He later told me that when they pulled back the sheet and he saw her beautiful face, bruised and contorted in pain, he fell to his knees and asked God to take him too. The residents of the once peaceful Las Cruces were scared. What happened to Katie was horrific. The police did everything possible to find the perpetrator as soon as possible because there were no guarantees that this person would not commit a new crime. When the police began investigating Katie's case, they first wanted to find out as much as possible about the last hours of her life, where she was, with whom, what she was doing, whether she quarreled with anyone, and had any enemies. The distance between the place where the party was held and the house where Katie lived was about a mile. The police needed to find out whether she had reached her home or not. So, the first thing the investigators did was talk to Veronica, her roommate, and Joe, her boyfriend. It seemed strange that these two stayed at the party, and Katie went home alone in the middle of the night. Joe showed no desire to cooperate with the police. He said that Katie had left, leaving her purse, phone, and keys. The detectives started studying Katie's route. They went from one door to another and interviewed the residents, hoping to get clues from them. But, unfortunately, it didn't help. No one saw or heard anything. One find led to the assumption that Katie reached her house but never got inside. Let me remind you that she left without her keys. The investigators searched the house and the surrounding area and found Katie's shoes lying outside next to her bedroom window. Apparently, she wanted to get into the house through the window, and someone attacked her at that moment. Footprints in the gravel next to the house also pointed to this. Katie fought for her life, but unfortunately, the perpetrator turned out to be stronger. The investigators suggested that after taking Katie's life, the perpetrator took her to the desert landfill and tried to set her on fire. They started wondering, was it a stranger or someone she knew and trusted? About 40 people attended that party. Maybe someone followed Katie when she went home and attacked her. Could this person be her boyfriend? The investigators wanted to find out the answers to these questions. They interviewed everyone who attended that party and discovered one crucial detail that Joe did not mention. Several witnesses reported that Katie saw Joe kissing another girl. Later, they saw them quarrel. It was the reason why Katie went home alone and forgot her purse. She was angry and wanted to leave that place as soon as possible. However, when the police interviewed Joe for the first time, he did not mention anything about it. He also didn't say anything about it to Katie's parents, who wanted to know why Katie left that party alone. The investigators questioned Joe again. They informed him that they knew he and Katie had quarreled because she saw him kissing another girl, and Joe admitted that it was true. According to him, when Katie went home, he followed her by car. Allegedly, Joe drove up to her house but did not go inside. He saw the light in her bedroom was off and thought she was already asleep, so he returned to the party. So it turned out that Joe was not at the party at the time when Katie was attacked. None of those with whom the investigators spoke could say with certainty when Joe returned. He probably could have had time to commit the crime, then take Katie's lifeless body to the desert and return to the party. Interviewing those who attended it, the investigators discovered another strange detail. Upon returning to the party, Joe started calling Katie's cell phone, which was in her purse. He found Katie's phone when he heard it ringing. Joe knew it was Katie's phone, but continued calling her until the morning. What was the reason for that? Maybe he was trying to provide himself with an alibi? Perhaps he wanted to appear concerned for his beloved. The investigators wanted Joe to explain his strange behavior, but he didn't want to talk to the police anymore. Katie loved Joe very much, but he did not even come to her funeral, which aroused even greater suspicion. However, all the investigators needed to exclude Joe from the list of potential suspects was his DNA sample. Experts found DNA samples on Katie's body in 3 different places. Most of it was under her fingernails. It was human skin. All the samples found on Katie's body belonged to the same person. The police wanted to compare Joe's DNA with the DNA found on Katie's body, but there were problems with that. Joe was out of town. His parents hired a lawyer, who informed the investigators that Joe had refused to provide a sample of his DNA. Looking at Joe's behavior, no one had any doubt that he had something to hide and that he had something to do with Katie's death. The police needed to find a legitimate method of obtaining his DNA to confirm this, but it took time. At the same time, the investigators were considering other versions. They were looking into similar cases, trying to figure out if Katie was the only victim of whoever took her life. DNA samples found on her body were checked against a national database, but there were no matches. The investigators decided to return to where it all started, the party. They identified all the men who attended that party and asked them to provide a DNA sample. And all the men agreed because they had nothing to hide. However, there were no matches with the DNA found on Katie's body, and that brought the investigators back to Joe. He was the only one who refused to provide his DNA. But the investigators found another way to get it. They found out that before going to the party, Katie and Joe spent some time in her bedroom where they had intimate contact. The police went to the house and took the sheet from Katie's bed, thinking that they would find Joe's DNA there. And they were right. The lab did find a sample of male DNA, but it did not match the one found on Katie's body. It meant that Joe wasn't the one who attacked her. Then why did he refuse to cooperate with the police if he wasn't involved in what happened to his girlfriend? The police sent the results of the tests to Joe's lawyer. After learning that he had been excluded from the list of suspects, Joe decided to talk to the police again and provide a sample of his DNA. The new test confirmed the initial conclusion: Joe was not involved in this crime. When asked to explain his refusal to cooperate with the police, Joe said he and Katie had intimate contact before the party, so he was afraid they would find his DNA on her body. As for Joe's behavior on the night of Katie's death, it remained a mystery to the police and Katie's family. After Joe was excluded from the list of suspects, the police had to look for other versions. Several people at the party told the investigators that Katie had rings on her fingers that night, including the ring that Joe had given her. However, when Katie's body was discovered, there were no rings on her fingers. The police believed they were taken off by the one who took her life. They went through all the pawn shops in the area but did not find Katie's jewelry. Another potential clue was tire tracks near where Katie's body was found. The experts managed to establish the brand and model of the tires. The manufacturer informed the police that such tires were most often put on pickup trucks. Unfortunately, it did not help to get closer to finding the criminal, and the case reached a dead end. About a year later, in Wisconsin, someone committed a crime that was very similar to what happened to Katie. Someone attacked a girl in Green Bay and did to her the same thing that happened to Katie. The victim was also set on fire, but fortunately, she survived. She told the police that she pretended to be dead, and that was the only reason she managed to survive. When the criminals left, she put out the fire and sought help at a nearby house. She said she was attacked by 2 Hispanic males. But in Katie's case, all the evidence pointed to only one person. They had to perform DNA analysis to confirm or rule out the connection between the 2 crimes. The victim from Wisconsin described in detail to the police the appearance of the men who attacked her. When the Green Bay police published these sketches, one of the farmers recognized his workers, Gregorio Morales and Juan Nieto, on them. One of them had relatives in Las Cruces, and he often visited them. Both men were arrested. The police investigating the case of Katie believed they had finally found the culprit. However, the results of the DNA examination proved otherwise. The samples did not match the DNA found on Katie's body. These 2 men were later convicted of assaulting a girl in Green Bay, but they were not connected to the Katie case. Nieto was sentenced to 70 years in prison and Morales to 50. Thus, the investigators reached another dead end. The only evidence the police had were tire tracks from the crime scene and DNA samples of the perpetrator. Katie's family hoped that DNA would allow the police to identify the person who took their daughter's life. But there were problems with that. It was not legal to take a DNA sample from anyone arrested by the police. Here's how Jayann, Katie's mom, will describe her surprise about this later. We had lost our daughter to a monster, and we needed justice. We needed to know who had done this and why. But most of all, we needed to know that he would be stopped from doing this again. There were no real clues. The detective in charge of Katie's case told me that the only evidence they had was DNA. You see, Katie had fought so hard for her life that the blood and skin of her killer had been found underneath her fingernails. A DNA profile had been extracted and uploaded into the National Forensic Database called CODIS. Detective Jones explained that once a week this evidence would be cross-referenced against the offender database to look for a match. This gave our family bright hope. We had the identity of our daughter's murderer. We just had to match it to a name. I made the offhand comment that this man was such a monster that surely he would be arrested for another crime. His cheeks swabbed and put into the database, and we would identify him, stop him, and bring him to justice. That's when Detective Jones said, "Oh no, Jayann, it doesn't work that way. Here in New Mexico and in almost every other state, it's illegal to take DNA when someone is arrested." I have to tell you, I was stunned. I knew that when someone was arrested, they take their fingerprints. They take their photograph. But was it illegal to use the most advanced, accurate scientific tool available to identify terrible monsters that are hunting down and slaughtering our children? 3.5 years after Katie's death, on December 18, 2006, there was a break in this case. The lab found a DNA sample that matched the DNA found on Katie's body. The man who attacked Katie was 26-year-old Gabriel Avila. He was a married father who didn't know Katie. He also had an extensive criminal past and was released from prison shortly before Katie's death. On November 13, 2003, less than 3 months after brutally slaying Katie, Avila was arrested for breaking into the apartment of 2 young women with a knife. The college roommates avoided an attack by locking themselves in the bathroom and calling 911. He was convicted of aggravated burglary and with intent to commit aggravated assault in March 2004. However, according to the Albuquerque Journal, when he was released on bond, Avila made a run for it. Avila could have been arrested as early as 3 months after the attack on Katie, but due to the system's imperfection, his connection with the death of Katie was established only 3.5 years later. The fugitive avoided police for nearly a year before he was apprehended in November 2004, based on a tip. He was sentenced to 9 years in prison. A DNA sample was taken from Avila upon entering prison, but it took another 2 years to be tested. When results provided a partial match to DNA taken from Katie's crime scene, the investigators jumped into action, quickly locating the truck Avila used to dump her body. In the center console, they found a ring belonging to Katie. This case showed that the system needed to be changed. The police spent resources and time searching for the perpetrator for 3 years, but Avila could have been arrested much earlier if the police had taken his DNA sample during his first arrest. It is also surprising that a sample of his DNA was tested only 2 years later, in 2006. The detectives investigating Katie's case went to the prison to talk to Avila. After seeing Katie's ring, which was found in his pickup truck, he confessed that he had committed this crime. He said he was in the area that night to buy illegal substances while his wife was away. That's when he saw Katie and asked if she needed a lift. She answered no. He then saw her again in front of her house. Avila said, "I stopped and asked her if she needed help. She goes, 'I just can't get into my house. I don't have my purse.' Katie wanted to get into her bedroom through the window, but Avila attacked her and started undressing her. And you, of course, understand what happened after he took off her clothes. After that, Avila didn't know what to do and decided to strangle Katie. He was afraid that she would identify him later. She put up a little bit of a fight, and for some reason I decided I was going to strangle her. Had my hands around her. I locked and I couldn't let go," Avila stated. He then loaded Katie into his pickup truck and drove her to a landfill in the desert, where he dumped her body on the ground. He decided that setting her body on fire would destroy all the evidence, but he was wrong. Avila's DNA sample was retaken, and it showed a match. When DNA evidence was found on Katie's body back in 2003, her parents were hopeful it would lead to a quick investigation. But in New Mexico and nearly every other state, it was illegal to take DNA when someone was arrested. DNA was only entered into the system if someone was convicted and sent to prison. This sparked a nationwide campaign led by Katie's parents to get a law named after their daughter passed in all 50 states, requiring anyone arrested on a violent crime to submit a DNA sample. The DNA would then be added to the CODIS national database. In 2006, Katie's bill passed in the New Mexico state legislature with only 5 no votes and was signed into law in March 2006. Thanks to the tireless efforts of Katie's parents, it became federal law in 2010, and more than 31 states now have a law similar to Katie's law in New Mexico. David, Katie's father, said his biggest fear was that someone else would have to die at the hands of Katie's murderer, but now he can put that fear at ease. Some opponents argue that this policy is an invasion of privacy or a violation of civil rights. Others comment that since DNA contains sensitive genetic information, it is quite different from fingerprints. In the United States versus Poole, a federal district court upheld that the federal statute allowing the collection of DNA samples before conviction for inclusion in the national DNA database does not represent a violation of constitutional rights. In issuing its ruling, the court specifically held that the collection does not represent a violation of Fourth Amendment rights. The trial of Gabriel Avila began in 2007. Avila apologized to Katie's family. His lawyer urged the judge to show leniency and said Avila was remorseful. District Attorney Susana Martinez argued that Avila waited more than 3 years after the slaying to confess, and did so only when detectives confronted him with DNA evidence. At the sentencing, Katie's father, David, urged the judge not to be lenient with the punishment. He argued, "We do not get another chance to see her in this life, and it is only right that the person who did this to her not get a chance to experience freedom again in his life." In May 2007, Gabriel Avila was found guilty and sentenced to 69 years in prison. He will be eligible for parole in approximately 2043 after serving 30 years of his sentence. Jayann said there's no such thing as closure, but she's ready to move on. "We've been healing. We've been going forward with our lives. We have 2 other incredible children we love so much," said Jayann. Jayann also vowed that she and her husband will continue to work to have Katie's law passed in all 50 states as a tribute to their daughter. Share your opinion in the comments, and thank you for watching this video to the end.